Welcome to the Longevity Protocol with Dr. Cristina Bosch and Dr. John A. Robinson. We'll be your guides to uncovering the secrets to optimal health, better sex, and happiness. From debunking aging myths to exploring the science behind what it means to live the Longevity Protocol, we'll dive into a wide range of topics. So, get ready for an exhilarating journey in what it means to live well and feel your very best at any age. We're back. You look beautiful, as always.
Thank you.
I was watching you get dressed and I was thinking about that. What are we talking about today? This episode is about farming, food and farming.
Yeah.
And what's going on, particularly here in the United States. And what, as we were preparing for this and talking a lot of this through, I think it's things that we have seen in our career for years now. And we're just starting to see this sort of resurgence, I think. Many things have happened and changed since COVID in terms of an awareness.
You mean a resurgence in people talking about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
In this sort of larger way. It seems bigger than what it ever has been. I've been in wellness for decades now, and just this change is something a little bit fresh, something a little bit new, and I think it's exciting. Maybe that's my just, looking at things as positively as possible, but we're seeing things that are still a big train wreck, right?
Yeah, I think what makes it feel new is that it's a lot of young people talking about this, which is crazy because that means I'm not the young people talking about.
Are you in that group anymore?
But again, this, like you said, we've been at it for quite some time. So when we start seeing a fresh voice, it's wonderful. It means that there's a resurgence in the awareness. It's also sad to think that things have only gotten worse, not better, since we were the young ones talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ultimately, we would think we were progressing towards improvement.
Correct. And we really haven't. Yeah. It's gone backwards.
Absolutely.
And for those of us who follow us on the sex docs, they get to see my rants on stories every once in a while. Part of the reason why I wanted to make sure that we're talking about this again is because, after the summer, you hear so many people on social media are traveling to Europe in particular. Mm-hmm. There's lots of great travel happening and lots of
we did
great food. But it's the European travel where I feel like people say, the food here is so good. And they're not even talking about these complex dishes. They're showing you a tomato, a strawberry, and they're like, it's so good. And they're right. Mm-hmm. Why is it so different?
I think the quick answer is the pesticide load.
Yeah.
We have had patients over the years say, I went to Italy. They have problems with gluten.
Mm-hmm.
They go to Italy, they eat bread and pasta the whole time and come back and they've lost weight.
Yeah.
So
I've experienced that.
Is it the gluten itself? And this is part of the sort of argument of what's really going on with gluten intolerance. Mm-hmm. Is it actually the gluten molecule, or is it the glyphosate as one prime example, and other types of pesticides that are in and around and interacting with the gluten molecule? With the wheat that is actually causing the problem. And I think it's probably a little bit more of that.
Well, especially in the absence of true celiacs.
Right. Because we see most patients are not.
They're not celiacs. It's, like what you deal with me or with our oldest, it's not a celiac issue. It's more truly a wheat sensitivity. And I know that's true also because barley and rye, which are traditionally, wheat, barley, and rye are traditionally the gluten-containing foods.
Yes.
Not when we're talking about cross-contamination with oats, which again brings us back to the whole problem with the food supply, but just those three that are the predominantly gluten-containing grains. Barley and rye, most people don't have as much of a problem with that. They really don't. So I keep coming back to the fact that the quality of our wheat is just jacked.
Yeah, well, it's certainly from a genetic standpoint, it's changed dramatically as well. It's not what it, would have been many, many generations ago. So that molecule itself is changing, and then add in the pesticide load, and it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we wanted to talk about were how that then relates as an endocrine disruptor. Mm-hmm. Obviously, hormones are something that we're very passionate about, something we do in our practice. And the whole concept of endocrine disruptor, or what had been coined back in 2006 as a obesogen.
Right.
And at first, I always remember reading about that back then, that they coined that term, and there was a lot of resistance even about saying that. And now there's been enough research out. But aside from just saying obesogen, they were saying, well, it's, let's say more technically, an endocrine disruptor, that it could lead to many different things, not just about obesity per se. But I think it's pretty clear that that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're not allowed to talk about, in American culture, perhaps in other places as well, we're not allowed to talk about fatness as a bad thing. Oh, protect fatness. It's like
it's like shame for that.
It's like an endangered animal that we have to, poor thing. But it's not an endangered animal. On the contrary, it's a severe, that is an epidemic. That's a severe epidemic. And the more we normalize illnesses, the less proactive we are in preventing them and treating them successfully. So I think that's why the obesogen word, in part, was so taboo. It wasn't going to be well received. But the good thing about calling it endocrine disruptor versus just an obesogen is that a lot of people will say, well, I'm not fat, I don't have those problems. And that's not true.
Yeah. And it depends, then how we're defining fat.
Right.
To what you just said there,
fatty.
too. And I can't remember, I wish I could remember at the moment, but they're ready to change the term obesity. From a clinical standpoint, they're ready to change that term and how they're defining it. I can't remember right now what it is. Perhaps we can have that down here at the bottom of what that new term is going to be.
But that's because they're adjusting
because of the stigma that's associated.
But
with
my question is, I guess we're getting off topic, which happens a lot. But my question to that would be, which we can bring up at another time, is it? You remember? Well, I guess it happened when I was in high school. You're a little bit older than me, but when I was in high school, that they adjusted the SAT scores, so then everybody was doing better.
Right.
But I'm like, that makes no sense because the relativity still exists. So is that where they're modifying the statistics of what it means to be obese, but really we're still fat, or it's just a term thing?
It was a term thing that I'm remembering at this moment.
All right.
They're probably forced to continue to change it. Because so many Americans, we're now pretty much at about a 75% obesity, at least overweight rate in Americans. At least 75% are walking.
Well, something common does not mean it's normal.
Correct.
That's a big distinction.
And that's exactly what we're attempting to push back on right now. So back to the endocrine disruptors, this is mostly the pesticides. And I think that's the biggest issue with what we're seeing in our food supply from, as you were saying earlier to me about from the seed on up. I mean, we're from before it's even been harvested,
right.
We're dealing with a pesticide load.
Okay. That's if you're talking about, people think of that just dealing with the vegetables, the fruit and the vegetables, the grains, et cetera. But actually that's affecting the animals as well, because the animals are then being fed contaminated foods.
Absolutely. And it's also about the other things, plastics. And that's probably, the phthalates.
Yeah.
We've been talking about phthalates since we were in school over 20 years ago, and how those phthalates are found in cheaper plastics, but virtually all of them are leaching these phthalates into the system.
Right.
That it's interesting, a lot of these endocrine disruptors really are estrogen-like. So what's the negative effect of these endocrine disruptors or obesogens? They have estrogen-like activity.
Negative estrogen.
Negative, yeah.
They're not keeping your breast plump and your cheeks full. That's not what they're doing.
No, because most things that are estrogen-like are affecting, let's say, breast receptors and other receptors in the body in a different negative way.
In a negative way.
Right, versus actual straight-up estradiol in its pure form, molecularly would not be causing those same negative effects. There's definitely a distinction.
It's an important distinction because we're always talking about estrogen replacement and how it's potentially a very good thing. So when you're saying estrogen-like, you're talking about the negative effects of not metabolically active estrogen. It's not contributing to our health. It's a detriment.
It's a detriment.
Yeah.
And again, it's the unique way it's affecting receptors. We know this with Premarin, the horse urine garbage that they still interestingly prescribe. I haven't seen it in a long time, but every once in a while I get a patient that comes in on it. And that is, there's plenty of research showing how that is affecting breast receptors differently than actual straight estradiol.
Right.
So again, here we are, a little bit of a squirreling that we're doing here, but it's still on point because these things are all in the food supply. It's what we have to contend with. It's in our food supply of plastics. We have to deal with that because everything's packaged in plastics. And there's really a starting to become a push with that. People are pushing back against putting plastics in everything. Water bottles is that's probably one of the biggest contributors to phthalates for people is water bottles because everything shifted in the past 2-3 decades to using water bottles uniquely. We never used to do that. So now there's this push to understand to go back to glass. Things, again, that we've been doing for decades now and understanding the importance of that. But we're seeing this sort of resurgence and push against the obvious negatives of these things. Industrial solvents, fungicides, that's another one. And another pharmaceutical agent that I have here in my notes is DES, or diethyl stilbestrol, or stilbestrone. DES, like the DES babies.
Mm-hmm.
And DES was this really potent estrogen that they were giving women to prevent miscarriage back in right around the early 70s. And they very quickly realized that that was a problem. This potent, nasty, it's an estrogen, but it's an estrogen-like compound, very, very synthetic, affecting tissue very differently. And what was happening is that the unborn female fetus then had an increased risk of breast cancer later on in life. In most of the paperwork that we would get or give to a patient, we'd say, did you or did you take DES, or did your mother take DES? We don't really ask that anymore because a lot of that is sort of cycled out from a generation.
Like bred it out, so to say.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really see that issue anymore. But statistically, that particular potent obesogen / endocrine disruptor was absolutely causing issues, in this case, breast cancer.
Yeah.
It's risk.
It's, I always feel like when we're talking about this, that all we're doing is listing thing after thing after thing that kind of just makes a person feel quite overwhelmed. I mean, it makes me often feel overwhelmed. So I think it's important for us to highlight, like you're saying, these are the main things that you're looking for, how to easily identify them, and then where can you take steps in reducing your exposure? Because just like there's cumulative detriment, there can be little by little cumulative benefit and cleansing,
reversal.
right?
Absolutely.
Because it really is, you and I were saying this, it really is these things, you're talking about the pesticides, but I was saying this is from the seed. So are we using GMO seeds? And then are we growing the products with the use of these super toxic chemicals? And then we're processing the food, and then we're packaging them in garbage. And then, I mean, it's like,
it's
from every
assault.
step.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with that said, what else? Like,
what do you have? Like, what? Because you were saying, I don't know if you're saying two things here. Meaning, I'm trying to follow you. Do you want to talk about how to fix it? Because I like what you're saying.
I always want to talk about how to fix it.
Then let's talk about how to fix it.
Okay. And, perhaps.
But I have a lot of notes here.
And they're good. They're really good. I think perhaps also, if we're going to list one that's yucky, maybe we can talk about how to minimize it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that.
I don't know.
I mean, I thought we kind of were. I mean, there is this push where people are saying, hey, just store everything in glass.
Right.
I mean, and we think that's less convenient, and maybe in certain ways at certain times it is, but it really isn't that big of a deal. Everything used to be put in glass.
Yeah.
So we certainly can get back to that. When it comes to water bottles, I think glass, or, we're using stainless steel and these types of things that don't leach any of these phthalates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one easy way to go about it. Using filtered water whenever you can in a container that isn't going to be plastic.
Right.
And that usually for most people is a pretty easy fix. Most of our patients are able to do that, and they get committed to carrying around a water bottle that isn't plastic.
I think the glass storage containers is a really important thing. Like, that's something I know we've been trying is the word, really, because I'm still not perfect. Ziploc bags are like a dream.
Right.
But they're not. They're horrible. And then it's not like you wash them and reuse them, especially if you're using them to marinate meat, or it's so unnecessary. So I've really made a very conscious effort to make sure that we're using glass containers pretty much for everything.
Yeah, the Pyrex, and we've been using this for years, and do make that concerted effort. And back to your point that for anybody listening, and it's just about steps.
Right.
One step, and to not overly get overwhelmed by saying, I have to fix everything right now.
Yeah.
How do you continually just make a new step, a new small change on a daily basis? Yeah. It's really cumulative, and it adds up. And I know that's what we've done from going all the way back to school to now. We started making just changes, and they just became kind of relatively easy.
And celebrating those achievements instead of looking around your kitchen and going, oh my God, look at all these horrible things. Every time I turn, I see something horrible. Then you can just really focus on, oh man, this month we changed to this and good for us. Now, what's the plan for next month kind of a thing?
So you're talking about prevention. We're talking about just avoidance in the first place. The other thing would be, how do we get rid of it once it's in the system? Because the problem with all of these obesogens, endocrine disruptors, they are very lipophilic. They will store in fat. And how do you get rid of them? You get rid of the fat. So one of the best ways to just cleanse yourself of these things is to get rid of fat tissue the best you can, and cleanse it out that way.
Right.
Another way to do it is, especially with a lot of solvents, it's sauna. Another thing that, again, I've seen this resurgence. We're seeing a resurgence in hydrotherapy. They're using the basics, getting back to the basics of traditional naturopathic approaches to health. But anyway, so yes, so using the sun, using heat therapy is one of the ways you literally have to sweat it out. Some of those solvents, there aren't almost any other better way to do it other than sweating it out. So that's through exercise. Of course, that helps to decrease our overall load of toxins.
Well, it's funny because part of the reason why they're called obesogens is because they make us obese, right? So it's this negative cycle of, I'm eating crappy food. It makes me fatter. I store the toxins in my fat. So one of the first ways to start losing the fat is to start cleaning up what you're eating. That goes hand in hand. I mean, we're talking about plastic storage containers and cleansing, but don't ingest it in the first place wherever you can. And this topic of the food supply, which is how we started, right? It's, okay, well, I mean, people hear me say all the time, really, I just like food and I like eating. And it's really shaped and motivated so many steps in my career, from starting with studying nutrition and dietetics to moving on to alternative medical practices. Then you tie in all the craziness of the politics and all of that. If we are making good food choices in the first place, then these cleansing techniques and things like hydrotherapy, which I already said I love, they become just routine instead of therapeutic.
Correct. It's part of lifestyle.
It's part of life.
Yeah. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you get an ice pod. It's just part of your day to day. And these things can be added on relatively simply. But yes, when it comes to getting rid of these things, it's avoidance. It is making sure you're cleansing them and just decreasing fat and trying to break that cycle of accumulation. And they all bioaccumulate. That's the problem with it. Back to the pesticides, which one of the things here, the soil itself is getting affected. So we need good bacteria in the soil, just like we need good bacteria in our gut. And the pesticides are affecting you in the soil, and they're turning around and they're affecting it in the gut as well. So again, back to that idea, it's just this cycle. So decreasing pesticide load, going towards organic foods that have a low pesticide load, or virtually.
What's the thing with organic? Right?
Yeah, I know. We were talking about that.
Holy moly.
That isn't what we would think it should be, because just like anything in marketing, it becomes a marketing term.
Right.
And then
gets
hijacked, governmental agencies kind of come in, and then the true definitions of these words are not what we think it would be. I don't know. It's like certain laws, and they say here's the name of the law, and it sounds really good in the title, but when you actually read what it is, it's not what you thought. So the word organic now is not just as simple as thinking, well, it's just pure organic.
It's not like a cheat sheet anymore. It's not like, oh, well, if I buy this, I'm safe.
Right.
Like people have said that about, for example, shopping at Whole Foods, that Whole Foods used to mean something about what kind of products they were even carrying. Well, that's not the case anymore. And a lot of those health foods are really just scientific experiments. They're not necessarily good for you.
We have really seen Whole Foods change over the years, haven't we?
I know. And it's not even to pick on Whole Foods. It's really all over the place. But yeah, it really has.
Well, I'm not trying to pick on it, but Whole Foods at one point was sort of the mecca of
a Whole Foods market.
The actual Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And, we literally used that as part of our studies. When we were in school, I remember that was the place.
It's funny when you go into these supermarkets and you look at the organic section, and almost everything is from Mexico, predominantly, at least here in Arizona. I don't know about where else other people get their produce, may be from somewhere else. But Mexico for us, which is funny. When I first moved to Arizona, I was like, oh my God, the fruits and vegetables are going to be amazing. I'm so close to California. It's like an agriculture mecca.
Mm-hmm.
All the organic stuff comes from Mexico. And then I think, first of all, we can't really be sure of what their organic standards are.
Mm-hmm.
And also, how are their organic tomatoes all year long? These are seasonal foods.
Right.
How are they available all year long? And how do they look like that if they traveled all the way from Mexico? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So this whole thing about where we're shopping and the label and the cheat sheet that used to be organic, I mean, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. I think the more you can purchase from the food provider directly, the better.
Yeah, having a relationship with your local rancher, farmer is the way to go.
Yeah.
And having a relationship with them to understand how do they do it. Because a lot of times they're actually quite excited.
Yeah.
When we've talked to them, they really want to explain. They're very proud of what it is that they're doing. And one thing I wanted to mention about that, the term organic, in many cases with these ranchers and with any of these farmers that are local, you have to pay to have that organic
Right, that
label.
certification.
Right, that certification. And it's extremely expensive.
Yeah,
usually for the smaller farmer or rancher, it's just
Mhm.
not, it doesn't make any sense for them financially to do it. But when you ask them how they're doing, and they're glad to tell you, they're glad to give you tours and show you
Right.
what they're doing it that way or even better
It's
than
almost like
what it would be.
traditional farming perhaps is a better way to refer to it. Like, I think our point, your point is, if you go to the farmer's market and you're buying tomatoes and you say, oh, are they organic? Then the farmer usually will be able to explain to you, well, technically, yes, because this is how we go about
Right.
raising them, but they're not officially labeled organic because of the burden of what it means to be certified, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I definitely prefer you shopping local. I prefer you going to the farmer's market, or especially now online, you can make relationships with ranchers from other parts of the country, because we can't say our local rancher. Well, I'm sure in New York City, they don't have the local rancher. That has to come from somewhere else. So you can form relationships with mail order places.
Where we were in Idaho.
In Idaho at the sheep herding, the dog sheep herding festival. It was awesome.
That was great. And I got a whole lamb.
Whole lamb.
And I had a great conversation with the guy there at the festival, and how they did it. It was incredibly well priced.
Yeah, it was
shipped
delicious.
it out.
And we really used it.
Oh, it was, it didn't take long to rip through that.
No, and you may say, well, I'm only, we're only a family of 2, or we're only a family of 4. Okay, but you have friends with similar values. Be creative, find ways to provide for your family the food that really is actually going to nourish you, not just sustain you.
Sure. And that's probably one of the things that people talk about organic or pasture-raised, more expensive versions of meat. If you buy in bulk, like we did with the lamb as an example, or buying in bulk with beef, you get the price down dramatically if you buy in bulk. So it's worth, and some places actually provide a freezer with the order.
Yeah, that's true.
So there is ways to do it for the family, even on a budget.
And the thing about ordering from the farmer and the rancher is that you really are making a positive decision for America, not just for your family. The more and more we study about these endocrine disruptors, and the more I get into the scientific component of feeding my family, not just the gastronomic one, the more I am so incredibly impressed and proud of the American farmers, especially the small independent ones, and really so respectful about, about how they're the ones that are keeping that fabric of America intact. I think I posted about this on the Sex Talks, how there's like 9 primary meat packing companies. There's only 9 in the whole country. Again, please don't ever quote me on these things because I'm not great with those, but we can fact check that for you. Let's say it's 9 and like 3 of them are foreign, right? It's like this whole thing that you're like, hold on a second. What the hell are we doing here? Who owns our land? Why are we giving our land away to foreign countries?
Farming land away to foreign countries
when we have actual farmers with people, they're employing the community, they have their own families, and they're the ones that are providing us with a much better quality. It's definitely become a very emotional and intellectual passion for me.
People need to push back against this. China is probably one of the largest foreign owners of farmland.
Yeah.
And particularly, too, even right here in Arizona, we see quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
And now also, I think Bill Gates is one of the largest owners of farmland right here in Arizona. So getting back to local is the key for a lot of these things.
I think that's probably one of the simplest thing we can say is shop locally.
These pesticides affect insects as well. Praying mantids, ladybugs, dragonflies, of course the bees. I mean, that's, they're getting affected, and we're really understanding how important these are for the entire ecosystem, for the best possible outcomes with yields and these kinds of things. So pesticides just aren't really helping. They're decreasing. Basically, the overuse of pesticides is causing an issue with a resistance for insects. So the insects, they become like superbugs.
Of course, they get adapted like everything else in nature.
And we've known this, let's say the overuse of antibiotics, using them over and over, and they're just creating a superbug. In this case, literally creating a superbug. So getting that's ways.
Scary.
Isn't it?
I always say I rather have like a crazy lion in my living room than a bunch of bugs. I don't really like that. Imagine superbugs. That's like something out of the Twilight Zone.
Remind everyone here, if you live in Arizona or up in northern Arizona in the Prescott Valley, the cicadas up there, because I was just up there yesterday, and they definitely, that sounds like a sort of biblical plague ready to come, just as a reminder. The cicadas here are just different. And then when I was in Oklahoma, the same thing there, they have actual, it's like a locust, and it's this deeper
There's
sound.
Something oh my gosh, I can't think of the word. Okay, forget it. It'll come to me.
Well, anyway, we love the bugs. We want them. But it is true. They can sound a little bit ominous.
Yeah, really. We were actually trying to say that bugs are important.
Yeah, right.
Ominous. That's the word I was thinking of. Thank you. Yeah, we were, yay, bugs. I just don't want you sitting on me. And the microbugs too, the microbiology. We're having resistance to the microbiology. That's an alarming thing.
Yeah. Remember when we were in school, the Environmental Working Group, the EWG, and early on learning about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And the Environmental Working Group, I encourage everybody to check this out. They will issue at least once a year, I think it's at least once a year, the top 12 pesticide-laden, conventionally grown produce. And I have the list here, and I do think it's important that everybody check that out.
So wait, I just want to say while you go through this list that even though we were talking about how organic is not going to be this foolproof stamp of yay, but it's still a scale. Yeah. Remember, we were talking about that scale of insult. Just like there's a cumulative benefit to making small changes, there is benefit anytime you can reduce, right? So this is important.
Yeah, virtually, and this probably is never an ultimate statement, but virtually anything that's going to be labeled organic is going to probably be better than anything conventionally grown.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, this is going to be true. So this is a list, the Dirty Dozen, regarding conventionally grown supermarket accessible fruits and vegetables. Number 1, strawberries.
Yeah.
And a lot of these will be, and we'll go through this, it's the thinner skinned types. Yeah, they absorb the pesticides.
Right. And especially the ones that lay close to the ground.
There you go. So strawberries in a bush near the ground, very thin skin. Spinach, kale. Not a big fan of kale anyway for a multitude of reasons. Nectarines. There's something that actually has a skin. So interestingly, again, usually the thicker skin things tend to have a less of a load. Apples, grapes, peaches, cherries, again, thin skin, pears, tomatoes, celery, and potatoes.
Mm.
So that list always changes a little bit, but
There's some like usual suspects.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the clean 15. So these things still can have the pesticide load, but it's going to be far less than the dirty dozen.
Mm-hmm. So this is important if you're thinking about your budget and you're shopping at the grocery store because perhaps that's what's available.
Right.
And you're saying, well, if I have to choose between where I'm spending my dollars on organic versus not.
Go to the dirty dozen for organic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So clean 15, these are the ones where, to your point, where maybe you can decide avocado. And avocado is virtually always on this list for years.
Yeah, because it's got like leather you don't eat.
Exactly. It's just, so you don't get that pesticide load. Sweet
Right.
corn, pineapple, onion, papaya.
Onion, interesting.
Yeah. Sweet peas, frozen sweet peas. Don't know why frozen. Eggplant, asparagus, cauliflower, cantaloupe, broccoli, mushroom, cabbage, honeydew melon. Again, a massively thick skin, and kiwi. Also
and bananas isn't on that list, huh?
I've never bought one, but
I mean, I never buy organic bananas
because of and we've seen it so many times
Right.
on a clean 15
Yeah.
list that. But again, they're sort of looking at the aggregate, and again, it does change on the way industry standards
Onions
change.
are interesting. I wonder that has to do just because they are so antimicrobial on their own, although that wouldn't affect pesticides. Anyway, interesting.
I'd love to see you sort of work that out.
That got rusty, though.
You had mentioned something about Driscoll, something you had read about that.
Something I
Explain that
saw.
again.
So again, this needs to be fact checked, but I think the point here is about this kind of hijacking of the organic label when we're talking about, we always talk about big pharma, but we really should be talking about big food with the same emphasis and the same fury that people talk about big pharma. Mm-hmm. So Driscoll, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with because it's often the only brand of organic berries I see at any of the supermarkets. They had some footage of their farming techniques where apparently they've been able to get approved through the FDA, the feeding of the plant some kind of organic liquid food. It looked like something out of the Matrix where they're like, remember when they were talking about how they like hook up the humans to like all the nutrients you need to survive?
Right.
That's what it looked like. But what was impressive was that the farmer administering the liquid food was like fully protected. Yeah, like mask, like out of ET, like fully protected. And then I think this is the organic food that we're eating because it's safer, but yet you don't have a nose hair sticking out. That's alarming.
That reminds me of something. And I always think about this. I remember this was years ago, watching the local news that I haven't done that in years. And they were talking about preparing chicken and the safe way to prepare chicken. So this is before I kind of understood even a lot of things about organic and pasture raised and all of these things. And they said, when you're preparing the chicken, in order to keep the surfaces clean, treat it like toxic waste. So if you have to look at it and consider this as toxic waste, it's that
horrible.
Yeah, and okay, and I mean I see what they're trying to do. They're sort of just trying to warn people to say that you want to be really careful. But if it is even remotely in the realm of being toxic waste, why the hell would you want to eat that? So
let me tell you a place where you can taste the difference is chicken.
Oh, shit, that's the number one thing.
Holy,
yeah. I can kind of tell with beef, but where it's always the easiest to tell is the quality of organic, high quality chicken versus not. Yes.
Yeah, that's
so
something.
Maybe it's lack of toxic waste. Is that what it is? I don't know, but either way.
I mean, I can appreciate the oversimplification just to really help people.
But in a way, they're right, because the amount of bacteria and things that do come off of chicken, again, conventionally grown chicken, and what we know, it's significant.
Which is ironic because God knows they inject those animals with all sorts of things.
Sure.
That was another thing I had posted where there was a quote from Bill Gates where he says that the importance of injecting animals with vaccines is so that you can bypass vaccine hesitancy.
What? Say that again?
In other words, if they are medicating your food so that you ingest the medication through eating,
oh, I see.
They don't have to worry about people who don't want to elect to be medicated.
Just take the choice out of you altogether. And
yeah, which is not, I mean, that's not really a question of whether you're pro-vaccines or not pro-vaccines or pro-some, but not, that's not really the freaking point.
Should that be the delivery route of a vaccine?
And eliminate the choice?
Mm-hmm.
There's all this, my body, my choice on either side.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common argument. And yet we're okay with it being put in our food so that nobody has a choice to begin with. Plus, again, the meat doesn't taste so good. That's
right
yeah,
on top
that
of the
stuff
list.
makes me piss.
I don't blame you. So the answer to all of this, and we've already mentioned this, was the local farmers. Go local.
Go local.
I mean, with some of even the things you were saying here that sounded a little political-esque. Local. The answer is local.
Unless go local.
Think local.
Go local, think local from the local vendors. Okay. But there are exceptions to that. Like if you can't buy local for whatever reason, like the farmer's market, like I said, that's just not a thing in your area. Okay. Wine. Buy your wine from Europe. Don't buy it from California. Or at least be mindful of the California wine. I know there's some wines that are a lot more.
Because of the pesticide load.
Yeah. Because a lot of those ingredients are illegal in Europe.
Mm.
They're not illegal here. So those are the kinds of things.
You had said something earlier. Convenience has been a ploy to make us dependent. And taking that effort out of the day-to-day responsibilities has made us lose touch with the value of those responsibilities.
I said that. That's
you
good.
did, yeah. And I was able to type that down. I thought that was fantastic. And that is so pertinent to what we're talking about here with food, but it's pertinent to maybe some of the other things that sort of gotten placed into this podcast today. But it is about an overall mentality and how that affects things. So what are we giving up for convenience?
Right. And what are we doing with our time?
What are we sacrificing?
So if I'm not going to the grocery store or the farmer's market to pick up, smell, look at it, teach your kids to do that. If I'm not doing that because I'm ordering my fruits and vegetables online through a delivery service, I'm not taking responsibility for what we're eating, for what my family's eating, for what I'm eating.
Yeah.
So what am I doing instead? Because I didn't have time to go to the grocery store.
What are people doing instead?
I don't know. I mean, I know how my day is accounted for. And it's not shopping online. So
we were watching, wasn't it not Yellowstone, one of the spinoffs, the 1923, and they were walking around in the town. They'd gone from the ranch into town, and they were looking at the this newfangled washing machine.
Oh, that's right.
And then the rancher guy said, "Well," and he's saying to the salesman, "Like, what do you mean? Why would I do this?" "Well, because you'll have more time."
Right.
But he sort of pushed back and said,
like,
"Well, time
to do what?
Time to do what?"
I mean, okay, I like my washing machine.
Time to do what? Yeah, well.
But yeah.
We don't need to go back to the Stone Age. That is not at all what we are advocating in any way, shape, or form.
And I know this is what makes I know listeners, this is kind of what makes listening to us a little bit difficult. Every time we say go left, then we go, but hold on a second, sometimes you got to go right. And look, that's because the main message of what we're doing is we're bringing exposure to the worst of it and the best of it to our ability. And we're reminding you that at the end of the day, how you live the best, healthiest life with longevity in mind is by finding those little places where you can make decisions. And sometimes those little changes yield big changes, but nothing is black and white. So buy local, unless you're buying, beer or wine, but just take it in conceptually, find inspiration to change where you can, remembering that not only are you doing good for your body and for your family, but that you're doing good for your community at large. Right?
From a beautiful woman, a beautiful doctor, beautifully said. It's a great way for us to end.
Thank you.
There's going to be more coming up.
Yeah, for sure. This is a hot topic for us.
Oh, yeah.